Hello everyone, welcome to the third video of Figma plugin development. In the previous video, we had covered how Figma plugins work. I hope you were able to grasp the idea of the core concept. Moving on, in this video, we'll be covering another side of Figma plugins which I think is equally important before we jump right into hands-on development. According to me, we should always have an idea of bigger picture before we build something. And the same applies to Figma plugins as well. Now that we know how Figma plugins work, we should also understand what are the things that they can do, what are the properties that they can manipulate, and what are the things that they cannot do. What are the limitations that we have to work under, so that whenever we are brainstorming our very own first plugin idea, we come up with feasible solutions which can be implemented by the APIs which are offered by Figma. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to open this topic by again asking a very simple question, which is, what are the things that my plugins can do? Now, there are multiple answers to this question, and we're going to go through each of them one by one. So let's get started with the first one, which is accessing the Figma document. Yes, with Figma plugin APIs, you can directly access the Figma document, the file which you're working with, and you can directly access the currently selected page, or you can read or write on top of the layers, and also you can duplicate those layers. For example, if you're building a plugin which is dealing with exporting icons of multiple sizes, you can simply duplicate those icons with multiple sizes and export with the clone layers property. So that is how Figma APIs can make your work easier. Moving to the next category here, which is editing the properties of layers. Yes, you can also edit the properties of layers just like the way you do with the properties panel in the actual Figma app. You can manipulate the properties like fonts, constraints, position, scale, alignment, and color. So all these properties are something that you can directly manipulate with few lines of code and simply integrate that in your plugin. Now moving to the next category, which is working with components. Yes, you heard it right. You can also work with components with Figma APIs. You can clone the components, you can create instances of these components, or if you want, you can also remove these components. Now there are multiple other things that Figma APIs also support, but for this video, I've not covered them in this section. I have added a link to Figma plugin documents which you can check out in the description below. There you can also find all the APIs which is supported by Figma plugin. For this section, I've only covered all those APIs which you will be very frequently using while developing these plugins. Now let's move on to the next section, which is what are the things that your plugins cannot do. So as of now, which is May 2021, there are few limits that your Figma plugin is having, and we're going to cover them one by one. Starting with the background plugins, this limit is where you cannot run your plugins in the background. By that, what I mean is, whenever you run a plugin, you do your task, you close the plugin. You cannot have a plugin running in the background even after closing the plugin. So whenever you close the plugin, you simply kill that plugin. You cannot build a plugin which can keep running when the user is doing some other task. So that is a limitation which Figma plugin is having. Moving on to the second limitation, which is triggering plugin code on events. You cannot trigger plugin code on any event or activity that user does. So if you are a JavaScript developer, you are already aware about all the events that can be handled by JavaScript. Similarly, you cannot trigger your plugin code depending on what the action the user is doing. So this is currently not supported by Figma plugin, though it will be really useful to trigger plugins which can automatically start by doing some action. Like let's say I'm creating a rectangle or a circle on my frame and I want to trigger a plugin which can directly fill in colors to that. That will be really helpful. But currently it's not supported by Figma plugin APIs. Moving on to the next limitation, which is running multiple plugins together. Yes, you cannot run multiple plugins together as of now. The main reason behind this is the security concern which Figma is safeguarding you from. As of now, you cannot run multiple plugins together because Figma doesn't want you to communicate your plugin data with any other plugin which is running. So it is to safeguard you and any other developer who have created the other plugin, and thus you cannot run multiple plugins together. Moving on to the next limitation, which is access to version history and multiple files. So if you are a Figma user, you will be already aware about version history, where you can revert back any of your file in case you end up making a mess out of your file. You can just simply select the version which you want to revert to and you can go back to that version. But as of now, with Figma APIs, it is not supported to do the same by line of codes. Another limitation which exists is also multiple files. You cannot manipulate multiple files together by using just single one plugin. So that is not supported by Figma plugins as of now. There are a few other limitations as well which we'll be covering in this section. Moving on to access to team library. With Figma plugins, you cannot access the elements of your team library. So if you have a team account which is having multiple team resources file, you cannot manipulate those team files with Figma plugins directly from the Figma plugin. The next limitation is plugins at properties panel. So you cannot have a Figma plugin attached to your properties panel and parallelly do any other task. You have to only run them in a window and you cannot attach them at the properties panel. The next limitation is triggering plugins based on keyboard shortcuts. So as of now, this is not supported by Figma plugin APIs, but it would be really helpful if this is added. So I can directly trigger any plugin based on a shortcut key that I remember. So let's say if I want to run Iconify, I can simply press Command plus I. If I want to run remove BG, I can press Command Shift R, something like that. Something where I can just simply avoid some steps and directly trigger the plugin. That would be really helpful. But as of now, it's not supported. Alright, now that you have a good understanding of the limitations of Figma plugins, let's move on to the next section, which is what do I need to know before developing my first Figma plugin. So the first item here is basics of web development. Yes, you guessed it right. You need to have a good understanding of the basics of web development and how things work to get started with the development of Figma plugins. The next item here is HTML and CSS for writing plugin UI. Yes, you need to also have a good understanding of HTML and CSS to write the front end of your Figma plugin. And the last item here is JavaScript for functionality. Yes, every plugin comes with a backend or a logic or algorithms, and this logic is again defined by JavaScript, as you would have already seen that in the previous video. So these are the few things that you need to know before you get started with the Figma plugin development. But what if you're new to the web development? What can you do to brush up your skills or adopt to these web development technologies if you want to get started with the development of Figma plugin? Well, that is also taken care by Figma documentations. Now Figma have added link to some of the courses that they recommend for you to cover if you're new to web development, or even if you want to brush up your web development skills. So I've also added link to these courses in the description below, and you can also check out the links to these courses in the Figma documentation as well. So if you're new to web development, you don't have anything to worry about. And that was it for this video.